Welcome back to another episode of Built and Backed. Joining me today is Phylicia Koh, a general partner at Play Ventures, a leading early stage VC fund that invests globally in gaming, consumer apps, and gaming adjacent tech. Phyl has led investments into Alter, Arya, BibleChat, and other companies. She most recently led Alinea's $10.4 million Series A. Before joining Play as employee number one, Phyl spent 9 years in marketing and growth, working with the likes of Mighty Bear Games, Voice Labs, Homage, Ethnicraft Online, as well as for the Singapore Economic Development Board. Phyl, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Ashley. I'm really excited to chat today, and thank you for the very comprehensive background of my zigzag career.
Yeah, of course. Hopefully, I didn't mispronounce any of those names, but I'm sure that
No,
I
you did it perfectly. You did
did.
it perfectly.
Well, I'm excited to have you here, and I know I just gave a brief introduction of who you are and what you do, but I'd love to open the floor to you and have you share with our listeners more about yourself.
As the intro says, I'm Phil. I'm a general partner at Play Ventures, and we're an early stage focused VC fund that invests in a bunch of exciting areas, I think, at least in gaming, gaming adjacent tech, and most recently, we've expanded into consumer apps, what we call playable apps. We're early stage investing from pre-seed to Series A, on our third flagship fund. I joined back in, I want to say 2018, maybe early 2019, as the first employee. Didn't have any VC background, just kind of jumped into it, with both feet and fingers crossed and everything crossed. But it's been 7 years, a great journey, really exciting. And yeah, looking forward to another 7 years, I suppose. The three buckets that we invest in, I think a lot of people know Play as a gaming investor. And that's definitely where our roots are from. Our founding partners, Harry and Henrik, were gaming entrepreneurs. They started their own companies. They sold them to Disney and to King, respectively. And so we definitely have, I think, an expertise and a lot of roots in investing in gaming. And that's how we started back in 2018. But since then, we've expanded a lot. We've invested in gaming adjacent technology. So that's companies like you mentioned, Alter. Alter was an avatar technology company that sold to Google. We've invested in payments companies. An app charge, which is a direct to consumer payment player right now, and also companies in ad tech as well. And third bucket, which is the part I'm super, super incredibly passionate about, is what we call playable apps. So these are just consumer apps. We're looking for the next billion-dollar consumer businesses, basically, that can take what gaming has figured out about how do you create something that's engaging and that people love returning to time and again, and how do you keep people engaged and making money from it as a business and applying it to new spaces, anywhere that basically you and I will want to build a daily habit on, whether it's, I want to be a better at taking care of myself in terms of spiritual wellness or physical wellness or mental wellness, or in a case of Alinea, start investing and building, my wealth, right?
Mhm.
So those are all areas that I specifically explore and focus on, and yeah, that I'm incredibly passionate and excited about.
I love it. And I'm curious to hear, you said that you had joined Play with no prior VC experience. So I have kind of like a two-part question for you in regards to that. One, what inspired you to get into VC? And two, what is it about like the gaming consumer apps and gaming adjacent tech that really made you want to focus on that specifically?
Yeah, so I'll start with the first question. What made me want to get into VC? I didn't plan it at all. I fell into it completely by accident. So, like you said, the first, I would say 8, 9 years of my career, I spent in working in growth roles, right? And everything as varied from the Singapore Economic Development Board, which is probably as far away from startup as you can possibly get. The whole aim of that organization was to attract actually foreign direct investments, typically multinational corporations, to set up shop in Singapore, create jobs, become the regional HQ for the Asia Pacific region. Extremely different from, working in some of my other startup experiences in health tech and e-commerce, and all of those things. My last full-time growth role was with a health tech startup. And I think that is very common with people who work in health tech for some reason. At least all my ex-colleagues have also shared the same experience. I just got incredibly burnt out, left and decided like, after 8 years of doing this, I think it's time for a change. I never really thought about doing anything else different. I always thought I was going to do this for the rest of my life. Very naive, I suppose. And decided, you know what, I don't want to go back to that. I also just never really considered doing anything else. So I don't know what I want to do. I just know that that's probably not what I want to go back doing. And, I literally was not kidding. I spent 3 weeks on the couch. I decided that I was going to meditate my way to enlightenment. I was going to figure it out by just meditating. As it turns out, it does not work for me. Maybe it works for other people, but not for me. 3 weeks later, I was like, I'm not getting anywhere. The list of things that I know I want to do, it's just as brief as it was before, and the list of things that I didn't want to do was kind of getting longer, but it really didn't narrow things down.
Mhm.
And I decided, you know what, I am already on a break. I'm not doing anything. I have nothing to lose. I have everything to gain. So let me just simplify this and stop overthinking because I know sometimes I can be an overthinker. I'm just going to try different things. I'm going to get out of my comfort zone. I'm not going to hold any assumptions about what I want to do, what I don't want to do. The only rule was one question: will you learn something about what you might want to do in the future? Yes or no? And it's very simple. And so just say, I ended up saying yes to most things that came my way. I ended up consulting for a game studio. I consulted for a bunch of other startups as well. I ended up leading product for a voice technology startup that was co-founded by Lev, who previously co-founded VK.com, kind of, I guess, Eastern Europe's answer to Facebook. And that was an incredible experience. I learned a lot. We didn't manage to find product market fit. We were simultaneously too early and too late at the same time, which is, I guess, a very common experience in startups, but it was a wonderful experience. And in that journey, 1.5 years after doing that, I had originally given myself actually a year's grace period. I was like, okay, this is my year of yes. I'm just going to say yes to everything. A year and a half into that journey, because I was having so much fun, I reconnected with Henrik, who was one of the founding partners at Play Ventures. They hadn't set up the fund yet. They were setting up and they were looking for folks to join as an analyst. And we started talking, I guess, through the fact that I've been doing a little bit of consulting work as well. And, it just felt right, I guess. I always loved working with founders. That's why I decided early on in my career, look, big companies, corporate companies, that's not for me. Like, I
Mhm.
love working with startups. I love working with founders. There's always something so exciting when, you see somebody with this great vision, a great dream, and great ambition, and I always want to be part of that. And so decided, you know what, I will learn something again, and that question has always served me pretty well. Um, I don't know if I'll like it, but if I hate it, I'll quit. What's the worst that can happen? So started off as an analyst, and that was, I think, 7 years ago, and it's grown since, and the fund's grown. We started with a 40 million, I want to say pretty small fund in grand scheme of things. And our latest flagship fund is 142 million. So we've grown quite a lot. We went from three people, the two founding partners, myself, and then my colleague Anton joined a little bit later. And then now we're 12 people across the globe. So it's still a lean team, which is, I think, really, really fun. But it's grown a lot, and it's been an incredible journey.
I love that you took that, what you call your year of yes, like really took that time to like take a break from what you had been doing. And as you said, there really was nothing to lose. There was only things to gain. And being able to try new opportunities that led you to play and being able to understand and learn that VC was the path that you wanted to pursue. And so I think that's a really good piece of advice for people is that when you get to the point that you might feel burnt out or ready for a change, like just kind of being open-ended to what the opportunities are can lead you to something you might not expect, as in your case.
Yeah, I think it's exactly kind of like that sign at the back you have, get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And, there was a lot of, I think in VC, especially the early stage, there's a lot of ambiguity, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's why we invest in the early stage. There's a lot of unknowns. We don't have the answers to everything. And I think in a way that was a really good life experience to have, to just be really comfortable with the fact that, yeah, I don't know where this is leading, but that's okay. I think that's also very opposite to, I grew up in Singapore. My parents, Asian household. When I left without having another job, I mean, they were concerned to say the least. This is not something you do in an Asian household. You don't just leave without a job. And I understand why. It's like a very different thing to what they grew up with and what they're used to. And so, they were extremely confused. And, a year on, even then, they still didn't really understand what I was doing. 2 years into joining Play Ventures, they still didn't really understand what I was doing. They're like, "Are you okay? Like, you can pay your bills, so I think you're okay, but I'm not really sure what you do." But yeah, it was a great experience just being comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. And I think there is lessons in there. Like I think when I graduated, and for a lot of people when they graduate, they're like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna join here and I'm gonna climb the ladder, or I'm gonna, become this. And they plan their life very clearly and step by step. And there is, I think, value in doing that, but I'm also kind of believing that sometimes that closes you off to being open to new possibilities and experiences.
Absolutely.
And, so when I've spoken to some folks who are like, how do you get into VC? I'm like, I honestly do not have anything that's actionable or repeatable for you to do. Um, except to say, like, if you really want it, to be open to it and to be okay to say, like, hey, you know what? Yeah, I have X years of experience doing A, B, and C. But if I want to be an investor, I also recognize this is a new space. And, maybe I might start a little bit junior or at the bottom, unless you start your own fund, to something that I'm used to, right? Maybe you
Mhm.
don't join as a GP straight away. Maybe you
Yeah,
join as a venture partner or operating partner or an associate or something. But if you really want to be in this space or you really want any other career path, you just be okay with that. And say, like, I guess believe in yourself and say that I can do it, and go for it.
totally. And it sounds like from the roles that you had in growth prior to getting into VC that you may have already had like gaming experience and whatnot, but I'm curious to hear if that's what led you to wanting to continue in that sector, if there's just something about like gaming consumer apps and gaming adjacent tech that really excites you and makes you feel passionate about it.
Yeah, so I would say it wasn't necessarily that I had experience making games. I'm not a game maker, and huge respect to game makers because that's a really difficult craft and business. Um, but I basically consulted for games companies, kind of using
Mhm.
my experience from growth. And I will say that I think gaming companies have always been, in my opinion at least, at the forefront of how they think about user acquisition, and the sophistication of that and how it all ties in together. It's not just, one part of the funnel on its own existing in isolation, but everything is interconnected. And if you think about, when you acquire a user and a user opens your app and launches it, what's that first time user experience? How do you keep them coming back? How do you, get them to pay for something that you've built, right? Everything is connected, and all that is important in order to have a really profitable, scalable business that doesn't just keep the lights on, that doesn't just keep your folks employed, but obviously helps you have a thriving business because at the end of the day, that's what you want. And I think I always appreciated that. So kind of joining into a gaming fund just was something that was exciting to me. I did want to work in that space. I will say it was a huge adjustment
Yeah.
going into it. Um, and especially as a game maker, of course, who am I to tell people how they should make games, right? And so it was a huge, I think, learning curve from understanding how to acquire users and how to scale game campaigns. But making a game is also, another involves a lot more skills than I obviously didn't have experience building, even though I had experience leading product. And I think yeah, it was a huge learning curve learning about gaming and the business of games and how it's made and how it's made to be profitable. And then the other was, I was doing two learning curves at the same time, right? I was also like, this was my first VC role. I'd
Yeah.
known about VC from, being on the other side of the table, working in startups, but not actually been a VC myself. So I would say I was like trying to climb both learning curves at the same time, which is pretty challenging. And frankly, like these were really male dominated industries respectively. So being at the intersection of both was even kind of more, I guess, of a wow, like being thrown in the deep end of of the ocean kind of experience and learning to, I guess, sink or swim. And that's, I think, a lot of also what VC is, if this is the path that you wanna take.
Yeah, I love that. And especially how you took, like you said, like two new approaches. Like you were totally new to gaming and then totally new to VC. And I think, or I feel like at least that's how in tech you learn the most is just kind of by like diving in and being able to absorb as much as you can. And so that's a question I have for you is that when someone in tech is pursuing something that's totally new to them, like what advice would you give to them? Like what worked for you that you feel like set you up now? 7 or 8 years later to be in the position that you're in?
That's a very good question, and I think that's probably applicable to being in tech and working in tech, and maybe you're founding your own startup, or maybe you're just entering a new domain that you don't know a lot about, or maybe it's just new, full stop, right? Um, and I think it's also applicable to perhaps to folks who are joining a venture fund. Every fund is built so different. There are larger ones, and maybe they're a little bit more institutionalized, and there's, it's kind of like entering um a larger corporate where things are a little bit more guided, and then you have funds like us where it's a smaller, leaner setup. We like to think of ourselves, we're a startup and we're a fund as well in some ways. And so there's no, like, nobody's going to break it down for you like this is step 1A and step 1B, and if D, then D, right? Or like break it down step by step. I would say we're looking for people who have just insane curiosity and initiative and problem solving skills. And I think that's really the three of it. Like, if you're curious, you're just going to keep pulling the thread. Like you observe something and you're like, oh, I'm curious, like, what does that mean? Right. So, that leads you to kind of, I guess, question things, the status quo, why are things done in a certain way? What are the assumptions behind it? And through that, maybe you find new opportunities and new angles for you, whether you're trying to build something new or whether you're trying to invest in something new. I think that that's something that's really difficult to teach. And yeah, initiative, right? Like I think there's always a lot to do in any kind of new domain, and if it's a new startup as well. So I think having the initiative to go find some ways you can value add is always going to be valuable no matter what kind of company you're in. Um, and yeah, I think just being able to problem solve, like essentially that is every job,
Yeah.
and your problem could be like, I want to make a new investment in somewhere and I need to figure out what that might be and where the opportunities are, or I need to figure out how I'm going to win this deal, or I'm going to figure out how I'm going to sell to this client and secure this client. Like if you can problem solve, like that's a massive skill and skill set that will serve you well anywhere, I think.
Yeah, that's great advice. And since being a part of Play throughout the past 7 or 8 years, I would love to hear some of your favorite portfolio companies that you've had the opportunity to work with, or even just some accomplishments that make you really proud to have done the work that you do.
Yeah, I think, well, for me, I think what I'm really excited about is, and I always like to say, like, the stranger it sounds, the more excited I am about it. I love things that are a little bit kooky because oftentimes it's okay, well, somebody's thinking about something differently, right? And it's a
Yeah.
different approach, or maybe it's an overlooked market. I don't know. But that to me sounds like, okay, that might be something there, that might be an opportunity there. And I know founders who kind of look for those overlooked segments, those blue oceans, and um, choose to build in those areas. So some of the playable apps that I've invested in, like Alinea, for example, right? Yes, it is a personal investing app, but it is serving an underserved segment, which is, Gen Z, millennial, first time investors, people who maybe are not super confident and they're not going to go on a Robinhood. And for that matter, maybe they don't know what a stock is. And I think that's an overlooked segment. If you think about the fact that Gen Zs and millennials, I think they're going to inherit, trillions of dollars of assets in the coming years. They're obviously young professionals earning money, but we also know there's a wealth gap, right? We know that women typically tend to underinvest, even though we are masters of consumer spending. We decide where the consumer dollar goes, like 80% of the time or 90% of the time, but we underinvest as a percentage of our income. And to me, that wealth gap is like that's a segment of people that are not being served by the current players or the
Yeah.
current institutions and the current infrastructure. And I dug into that space. I read books about it. How do we get more women to invest? I spoke to investment advisors and brokers about the experience and the fact that even in heterosexual couples, right, most of the time it's the husband that's making the investment decisions, that's taking care of the financial decisions. And the wives are not necessarily involved. And that becomes kind of sometimes a self reinforcing vicious cycle where they don't build that confidence.
Mhm.
Um, and unfortunately, sometimes when, their husbands are no longer around and they have this estate that they're meant to deal with, like they have no idea what they've invested into. Even the way that you talk to women and men about, their retirement goals, it's very different. Most women don't think in, if I ask you like, how much do you need for your retirement? You probably wouldn't be thinking necessarily in a dollar amount. You'd be thinking like, okay, this is my goal. I would like, a 3 bedroom cottage on the beach. I want to be able to travel with my girlfriends once a year. We want to do a big tour in Europe or something like that. Like that, that's how you describe your ideal retirement, and then we work backwards from that. But that's not how a lot of things work currently, right? It's somebody asking you, oh, well, okay. And then you say, I need X million dollars, right, to retire.
Yeah.
And I don't know what X million dollars translates to really. I can tell you the dream retirement I want, but not into dollars and cents way. So anyway, that's a really long-winded way of saying that I was very excited to find Alinea. I actually stumbled across them. So it's kind of looking at that space. I stumbled across them on TikTok.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and was like, okay, what is this thing? And who are these girls? And okay, that looks interesting. And I was like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I've been looking for. Started talking to them and was super impressed with what they were building and so invested in and led their Series A. And that's one example. And then there's another company called that makes an app called BibleChat. So we've got your wealth taken care of. Let's take care of your spiritual needs. Um, but this is also really interesting because I like to look at demographic tailwinds and what's happening, right? How are consumer tastes shifting? And one of the things that was really interesting is that perhaps it's a reflection of the craziness of the world that we live in. But more young people are turning to faith. They're interested in the Bible. Bible sales were picking up, which is obviously, at least in the US, right? That's a reversal of the trend that has always persisted for the past few decades. And I was also thinking about it from the fact that, I was raised Catholic, my family's Catholic. Um, and I was thinking about, like technically, if you think about it, religion is an incredibly well retaining product. You have families that remain Catholic, generation after generation as a religion. It's 2,000 years old. So, think about it, it's a 1,000 year cohort. It's doing quite well. But at the same time, the practice of faith and daily habits hasn't really moved with the times. It hasn't really modernized, right? You'd
Mm.
have maybe churches who adopted streaming, especially during the COVID period when nobody could go anywhere, and you needed to reach your congregation and your community. But other than that, it hasn't really moved a whole bunch. And so I started digging into that space. Looked it up actually on App Magic, which looks at mobile app store data, and saw this little tiny app called BibleChat that was just kind of taking off to the right like that. And I was intrigued. I looked into it. It was a Romanian company. I was like, that's a new ecosystem. Didn't know anybody there. I only knew one person in the whole of Romania, and it was a wonderful founder who unfortunately we did not invest in, and we didn't, but we had a great conversation, and he was so kind. I reached out to him. I was like, there is no way he's going to introduce me to this founder. There's no way. I mean, it's too fresh. It's asking too much of a person, right? But he was so kind, and he He introduced me immediately. He responded to my email in like 30 minutes and was like, okay, yes, you will love having a conversation with him. He introduced me to Laurencio. I started talking to him, and it was just clear that, his vision of how he wanted to build BibleChat, what he was doing, he was so driven, his great vision. He was super aligned and interested in taking the best of what we learned from gaming in terms of building that daily habit again and applying it into building kind of like a digital church for Christians across the globe. So, like I think those are an example of things that people are building that really excite me. And like I said, like if it sounds a little kooky, I'd like to hear about it.
And I think like from what you shared with both Alinea and Bible Chat, that the commonality between them is that it seems like both of these apps are modernizing industries or sectors that previously had not been modernized. Like you mentioned with Alinea that it was that of course investing is not geared towards Gen Z, and how with anyone with faith or certain religions, like it's always been the same. And so I like your approach of thinking about, well, what are industries that have been around forever, but could really use a new touch or a new perspective on it?
Yeah, and for me, I always say I don't like to fight gravity. I
Mhm.
mean, there are, I think, persistent truths, desires, needs that human beings always want. We'd like to make money, we want to have fun, we want to be entertained, we want to have, kind of purpose in life. And those are the things that I think of because they're such powerful drivers and they persist with us through, the course of human history, right? And they will continue to do so. And so those are things that I really like. But I also like to think about, how are things changing? We
Mhm.
think about people going from, you know, dating, for example, right? Like I think so much of our lives have become, there's an app for that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when I guess started dating, like dating apps were just starting out. Like I always like to say it was pre-Tinder that I met my partner. So that ages me, that dates me. But like most people today meet their significant others through, Tinder or Hinge or whatever it is. And it's interesting because I think sometimes we take it for granted that that's just what people want. But we also see that that's not true because with a whole new generation of folks, like that's the only thing that they've known, which is to
Mhm.
meet people online and just through an app. And then it goes in the other direction where people kind of miss that offline experience and miss connecting with people in person. And so, we invested in a company called Time Left that helps people meet in real life. They're hoping to address kind of the issues around loneliness, especially as you get into adulthood. It's always harder to meet new people and make new friends. And, that's what they're trying to address through in-person interactions. So it's always like to me, it's just super interesting to understand like, okay, what are people doing these days? Like what's going on, what's new, and what's changing. And I think that's where opportunities lie.
Yeah, and that's the perfect answer to segue into my next question that I have for you, which is say that there's a founder listening to this episode who is in gaming or consumer apps or gaming adjacent tech, and they're building something in one of those sectors. As a VC, what do you look for in those types of startups to invest in?
I mean, there's so many things. I'm gonna focus on the fact that we're early stage investors, so obviously we're looking at things in that arena and stage. I think, look, if you are investing in something that there's a little bit of precedence for, right? Like an investing app, right? For example, ideally, what we're trying to look for is a team and founding team that really understands their target audience and that also understands the domain that they're playing in. That's the ideal scenario, where you can take your previous experience and apply it into, kind of learnings, baggage, mistakes, but also kind of what works, and you can apply it into those new startups that you're looking at. Sometimes I think when it's such a totally new space that nobody's done before,
Mhm.
and yes, there were faith apps before, but for example, there wasn't really, AI machine learning hadn't really developed to a point where you could technically chat with the Bible, right? You ask the Bible questions about your faith, and have it actually kind of come back to you and reply. and with responses that is easy to understand, especially in the modern day context. When you're pioneering, I think new experiences and new business models and completely new domains, I think yes, it's helpful to be a subject matter expert, but how can you be a subject matter expert on something that is so new?
Mhm.
And there are some times we're looking for people who just kind of are in the weeds, right? They're doing the work, they're building with or without you. Um, and in a way, sometimes it doesn't matter if they don't have that past experience because that can also, experience can also mean baggage and preconceived notions, even though things have changed and the underlying factors have changed. And so your assumptions no longer are true.
Mhm.
And so, like in that case, we're looking for people who just kind of really, really are in the weeds and getting their hands dirty and they're building. And I think also the truth is these days, especially with, what we're seeing with AI and how it impacts development and the costs and, how quickly you can get an MVP. I'm not saying it's going to be a scalable product, but how quickly you can get an MVP live, like we see teams these days kind of building without venture money, and that's great. They'll come to us even if it's their pre-seed company and like, yeah, we did this test, and no, it's not a product that is ready to be let loose upon the world, and it won't, it's not, it's probably going to break if we have like 100,000 users coming concurrently. But we've tested assumptions here. We had a hypothesis, and we managed to test it, and that's great because it shows us like again you're hungry to build and you're gonna do this. And I always say like I guess the most exciting founders you want to invest in are those that you feel they're going to do this with or without you.
I love that.
Yeah. If I meet such a founder and I really believe in what he's doing or she's doing and the opportunities they're pursuing, I want to be part of that journey.
Yeah, and I think because excitement is contagious. Like you probably see this in your work all the time with like the portfolio companies that you're working with and whatnot, that like when someone else feels really passionate about what they're building, not only to your point are they likely to succeed, but it also is something that then makes you feel excited and you feel really inspired because it's something that's just being passed on to you through how they feel.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't think I've seen founders succeed when they're not excited about what they built. And I know sometimes founders feel like, oh, the big bad VC is going to come and sit on your board and then they're going to tell you what to do. Maybe there are some bad faith VCs that do that, but at least, for like honestly at the early stage, we are aware that what we're investing into on some level, on many levels, is a hypothesis. Many, many, many hypotheses strung together and, that need to be proven out or disproven. And so pivot is normal, change is normal. Um, and sometimes I think, your board members or your investors will have ideas of what they think you should or should not do. And I think sometimes for founders, I understand it. I think it can be a struggle to want to do what somebody tells you to do, or things has really strong opinions on what you should do. But I've never kind of seen it work out if they don't really feel excited about it themselves. So, everyone will have an opinion on what you should do, but ultimately you are the founder and this is your company, this is your startup. So it's also what you want to build. What do you feel most passionate about and what do you believe the most strongly?
Totally. And on the topic of excitement and passion, I would love to hear from your perspective, for you to give a shout out to someone who's doing something cool in tech right now that you're really admiring or feel really inspired by. So it could be a founder, another VC, builder, really anyone is fair game.
That is a very good question. I'm obviously really excited about all our founders who are building things. Shout out to, I guess, Ofer and Tomer from Arya, who I invested in as well. And I know that's a bit of a cheating answer, perhaps, but they're building in a space that I think not many founders would dare to go to, and definitely um, not easy to build for. They're building for couple intimacy and relationship wellness. And they're pioneering this journey into that category and really starting this category, which doesn't exist. So shout out to them. And yeah, I think there are other companies. I don't know if I can, there's other firms here, but I don't know if I can say what they do. But I'm currently in London at the moment, and there's an investment fund here called Caritage, and they do really interesting, edgy investments. And I just kind of admire their bullishness and courage to just invest in whatever category. Some of the things they invest in would make people bat eyelids for sure,
Mhm.
but they have conviction and they go forward with it, and I respect that a lot.
Yeah, and that totally aligns with your belief of the stranger something sounds, the more excited you are about
I think so,
it.
probably. That's why I admire them. But yeah, I think that's true. That's a good point.
Phil, this has been such a good episode, and I've so enjoyed having you on the show to talk about everything you've been doing at Play. And I'd love to have you share with our listeners where they can find you online in case you'd like to connect.
I'm on everything. So I'm on LinkedIn. You can look for me, Phylicia Koh. I'm on X on the with the very, very inventive handle of PPPHYL. My email is Phylicia, just my name at play.bc. Feel free to drop me a note anytime. And yeah, thank you for having me, Ashley.
Of course, I'll include those places in the show notes for our listeners, but thank you again for coming on Built and Backed.
Thank you so much. Take care.